We can now make stage 10, and first we're going to make the small substage. First, make sure you've got everything that you need open. So we've got the axle, we've got the cross block that's 3 long, we've got the friction pin, we've got the small bush, we've got the axle with bore, and then we've got the 2 beam with axle holes. Now it doesn't really matter too much which you start with. I'm going to start with this one, just because it's right in the middle of the assembly. So I'm going to go to File, Make Assembly from Part. I'm going to pin the Insert menu open because we've got quite a few parts to insert. So first I'm going to insert that cross block 3 long. And I'm going to rotate it around to the correct orientation like this. Then I'm going to insert all of the other components at this stage. Firstly, it's the small axle. Then next it's the friction pin. I'm going to insert that new axle with bore that we just made. Also the small bush. And then finally, I'm going to insert that 2 beam with axle holes. And then you can close the Insert Components menu. Now before I actually mate anything, I'm going to check that first component is lined up properly with the assembly planes. So I'm going to go to a top view, and I'm going to hover over the planes in the assembly. And we can see that it's offset from the assembly planes. So to fix this, I'm going to right click on the part in the parts tray, and then press Float. We can now move it around to wherever we want. I'm going to expand that first part, the crossblock part, and find the plane that goes down the middle, which is this one, and then I'm going to line that up with the assembly plane. Then I'm going to do the same for the remaining 2 planes. So I'm going to get the front plane here and line it up with this plane in the part. And then I'm also going to get the top plane and line it up with this one. So now that crossblock part should be fixed to the assembly in the right position. Then it's just a case of mating all of the other parts in place. I'm going to start off with a small axle. I'm going to make that concentric with the hole at the front, and I'm going to lock the rotation. And I didn't quite lock that one. I think I clicked the button twice, so I'm going to expand the mate and I'm going to lock it here. I'm then going to center the axle by getting the plane that goes down the middle and lining that up with the plane that goes down the middle of the assembly. And when we do things like this, you can really see the value of using those mid-plane extrudes. Next, we can make the friction pin lined up with the hole. We can lock the rotation, and then I can drag it down to the correct place, and I'm going to make the bottom of the friction pin and the bottom of the beam coincident. Next up, we can add that new part, so we can make that concentric with the friction pin on the top, and we can lock the rotation. For the height of this top piece, I'm going to make it so these 2 inner faces are both touching, so they're coincident. But if we look at the part, we can now see the pin is sticking out of the top. So this may cause us some issues later on, but for now we'll leave it as it is, and we might come back to that later. Next up, we can mate the bush in place. So let's select a circular face, also a circular face on the axle, and make those concentric, and let's lock the rotation. And then let's just make the inside face of the bush and the outside face of the beam. And then finally, let's move the 2 beam with axle holes into place. So I'm going to get the circular face inside here and also on one of the axle connectors. And then I'm going to make those concentric. I'm going to lock the rotation. And then I'm just going to make this outside face and the inside face of the beam. So we've almost got that substage from stage 10 that we need. We just need to mirror over 2 more components. So let's choose the plane that goes down the middle. For me, this is the right plane. Also select the 2 beam with axle hole and then the bush part. And then go to Assembly, go to the drop down underneath Linear Components pattern and choose Mirror Components. So we've got the right plane selected and we've got those 2 parts selected. We can then click Next and we can see on the preview that looks right. So let's press OK, and those 2 new parts are added. And there we've got that sub-assembly created there. So let's save this and let's call this stage 10. We can now insert this stage 10 to the main assembly. So let's go back to the main assembly. Let's go to Insert Components, find stage 10, and then put it in the assembly somewhere about here. Then to actually mate it in place, let's select this circular face, and let's also select a circular face inside this part, and let's make those concentric. And let's lock the rotation there. And then for the left-right position, let's just make sure it's in the middle. So we could line up the outer face of the bush and this beam, but instead we'll use the planes that go down the middle of the assembly just to make sure it's definitely in the middle. So let's find the plane that goes down the middle of stage 10, and let's line that up with the plane that goes down the middle of the assembly, like so. And now if we zoom in, we can see we've got a very small gap between these parts. That's just due to the tolerance and the way that we've measured these parts. We might be slightly off with measuring them. And there we've completed stage 10, so we can now save this. In the next video, we'll move on to section 11, and we've only got to make one new part for that, and it's pretty similar to things we've already made.